I need to bring it up for people to start preparing themselves for what is most likely one of the biggest lies that we've been told, and that is what space is all about. What is space? We know very little about space. All we know about space is what we learn from NASA and the space agencies that are all funded by the big money people and the global elite. And it has become very clear and very evident to me, and I have overwhelming evidence for this, not just from my own research, but from people I've spoken to as well, that space is not what we think it is.
One of the hopeful things about the work and the tours and the questions that people ask is, well, okay, so what can we do now? And the Anunnaki that are talking to me are very impressed with and surprised with what we're doing. So I remember when we inaugurated the healing circle on the lawn by the river, and they said, we suggested this as a possibility, but now that you've done this, and then we did those huge healing ceremonies in Blobash Corral, and they said, Blobash Corral was not intended as a healing circle. That is nothing that we ever intended. But the fact that you have taken this energy and the potential of this energy and the fact that it works above and that it works below, and you've harnessed this energy for a healing purpose, that's amazing. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another of the incredible Tellinger Talks with my good friend, Michael Tellinger. We're carrying on with all the incredible things that we have uncovered, semi-discovered, blown our minds with all of the stuff that's happening in the stone circles in South Africa. So welcome.
Jean-Paul, great to see you again.
Right.
Today, we're going to continue our journey of discovery, exploration, specifically focusing on your work, the shamanic downloads and exposés and revelations of your incredible work, your ability to connect to the spirits, the site whisperers, the Anunnaki, the giants, and so much more. In different timelines across space and time, and that's really the exciting thing.
Yeah.
And I always when you tell me that we enter a stone circle or an ancient site or anywhere, and then you get like these guys tapping on your shoulder or attracting your attention, trying to talk to you, and then you first have to analyze which timeline are you guys in? Are you like the 3,000 years ago, or 500 years ago, or 300,000 years ago? And you first have to figure out which timeline these beings are talking to you from. And that's a fascinating thing in itself. So I think we want to continue the discussion with the genetic cloning and research in the genetic stone circle, or as we've come to call it, the Welk Circle, the Anunnaki research facility. We've gone into quite a bit of detail there already. And see where the journey takes us. Let's just go free form here, and I'll give it to you. Take it away.
Yeah. So I guess one of the things to kind of share and explain is that when this happens, I sort of, I put out an intention. So we walk into a circle and we're saying we want to know more about this circle. So that can be a bit generic of a statement. So sometimes I get someone that shows up that's happy to share something, but it doesn't connect exactly to what we heard before. And quite often it's someone that just is working there. And the timeline is a very confusing thing. So they don't understand our movement of time. We don't really understand how their cycles work in terms of what's a year, what's the equivalent of a year, because our year means nothing to them. They have no concept of what our year is. Because remember, I'm not talking to like an omniscient spirit guide or something. I'm talking to the dude that was there. So this is an Anunnaki who occupied this space that we're standing in some other time. So they only know what they know. So sometimes we have to say, are you during the Enki period? Are you after the Enki period? Are you here when the gold extraction was happening? Are you, so it's fascinating to see that there were so many expeditions over what I think for us is hundreds of thousands of years.
Yeah, it certainly feels like it. And do you recall ever meeting somebody that's a bit confused by your presence?
Only at Homesick Hill. At Homesick Hill,
yes.
So we should explain. Near these two circles, there's another hill that's quite a distance away, and there are some very large stones that ring with an incredibly deep tone. It sounds like you're hearing Big Ben or something. It's an incredibly beautiful deep tone, and there's there's about, well, we found, I think, 4 of these large stones that are suspended on little tripods and things. And when you tap them, they're just this beautiful, deep resonance. And it was explained that we call that Homesick Hill. And that was kind of the place where the Anunnaki that were working would go and sort of chill out and hang out, because they would feel homesick and they would long for life back on their planet and the way it was. So they would just gather and just relax on this hill. And this particular frequency is a frequency that calms the heart. So they would have this tone and they would calm and relax. So it was like, if you would imagine if there was such a thing as the staff lounge room or the staff room for the Anunnaki, this was kind of it. This was like the little chill out zone. So sometimes I would be there and I would get odd looks. They would look at like, who's that? And, you know, so from what I understand from other sight whisperings, I look as much like a cloudy vision to them as they look to me. So they kind of see this kind of, you know, like when you see heat, that ripple of heat radiating off something, that's kind of, I look more formless to them, but that's kind of what they look like to me. So that's the closest I've gotten to people kind of going. And I remember at one point, somebody was up on Homesick Hill with me, and we were talking to one of the assistant engineers from one of the ships. Well, that's right, it was Brant, and he was really curious about jet propulsion and how they traveled and how does the ship move and what do they use for fuel. And so the people that we were talking to said, sorry, not our field. We're the water people. We were dealing with the water stuff. But look, head back to Homesick Hill and I'll see if I can get one of the engineers to come down and talk to you. So we hiked to Homesick Hill and we sat down, and there was this young assistant engineer who said, I think you're waiting for me. So that's the closest I know to them actually noticing me in any way like that.
And do you recall what he told you about the propulsion and the energy? Do you recall it, or would you have to refer to your notes?
I can recall some of it. The things that were astounding were they do not travel any way close to jet propulsion or fuel or anything like that. It's frequency. So they explain a couple of principles. So you'll have to chime in here because your science is way better than mine. So they said that frequencies stack up, and you can have a bandwidth that has a whole bunch of frequencies. And there are little spaces in between those frequencies. So there's this frequency and then this frequency. And in that edge between the two is where you can slip yourself in and you can travel. And they hold you together. So if you can find...
That's exactly, that would be what one could probably compare that. The best comparison would that be to like a standing pressure wave. A standing wave create in our area here, in the air around us. People watch the examples of levitation on YouTube. You go there and see people levitating little polystyrene items and little droplets of water and levitate those. And that you do by creating sounds. And where the waves cross over, you create a pressure wave and a standing wave, and it's really the pressure wave differentiation that traps that object in that area. So it sounds to me like that's what they were trying to explain to you, but on a much more advanced level. The problem we have with the sound frequencies that we use in showing how sound can levitate things is that you can't levitate heavy objects because the amount of energy you need to create to levitate heavy objects increases, and we don't have the capacity to do that. They're not using sound; they're using frequency itself, and possibly hypersound. Not possibly, most absolutely, definitely hypersound. So sound that moves beyond the speed of light. It's the energized form source of sound that is resonance itself. And obviously has a toroidal field nature, which they all have. So it goes into the much more advanced understanding of sound. So it's great. I can't recall you ever mentioning this to me before. So it's great. You see, going back and revisiting these because we've not really done this before. No. So we need to do it in more detail. And so So they stack up these frequencies, and it's in between those frequencies that they can be kept suspended in some way, and then move some way.
So then they said, we know the frequency of the destination. So every destination has a particular frequency that it radiates. So once you know the frequency of the destination, then the ship itself, which is an organic structure, aims for that frequency. So everything focuses itself on that destination, and then you just go there. You just arrive there. It's not that you're actually burning fuel and traveling. You're dialing in, this is where we want to end up. And the job of a pilot on their ship is to make sure that there is no alteration to the destination frequency.
So this is really important, John Paul, and I want to bring it up. I don't really want to go down this alley, or this path, but I need to bring it up for people to start preparing themselves for what is most likely one of the biggest lies that we've been told, and that is what space is all about. What is space? We know very little about space. All we know about space is what we learn from NASA and the space agencies that are all funded by the big money people and the global elite. And it has become very clear and very evident to me, and I have overwhelming evidence for this, not just from my own research, but from people I've spoken to as well, that space is not what we think it is. And at this stage, it's very likely that what we call space is actually filled with water. The entire space is actually water. It might be water in a different state, not H2O, but H3O2 or whatever other form of water that you can. We're only scratching the surface of the knowledge of what water is and how it can morph and form different phases of water. And what we do know, absolutely do know, is that NASA has been telling us for at least 30 years that space is filled with water. There's water everywhere in space. Now, if this is new to you, if you've not heard this before, then please watch one of my lectures, but I'll be doing a lot more presentations on this. And they've been saying this, putting this out over and over in press releases, how much water there is, and, supercluster galaxies shooting out bullets of water, and water from Orion, and water at the edge of our solar system, that our entire solar system is surrounded by water. I mean, this is relatively new. This is relatively new information. I think like 2 years ago, maybe not even that far back, maybe like a year ago, main news bulletin from NASA. But unless you go and research this, unless people go and research this, mainstream news will never focus on this, because they're focusing on the politics and the propaganda to keep the political regimes in power. That's all we see is politics and bullshit on TV and on the news. So unless you go looking for this, or you have an interest in what NASA is discovering, you're not going to know this. So there's no question that space is most likely filled with water. And I have never spoken to anyone that claims they've been to Mars or any other planet or anywhere else other than Earth. No one has ever said they fly in a spaceship to get there. They always say, and it's probably half a dozen people that have reasonably good credentials that claim they've been to other planets. And they always say, no, they go through a wormhole or a Stargate or a jump room, or they've got all these different words and names for it.
Yep.
And the industrial military complex calls it a jump room. You go into this little room, it feels like a little cubicle with special things, and it closes, and there's a weird thing that happens, a pressurization or whatever, and then boom, and you get out and you somewhere else, on another planet, another reality. So this is very similar to, this is really important to contemplate, that space is most likely not what we've been shown in science fiction movies. This is why science fiction movies are so popular and so big, and so much money is spent on science fiction movies, because it's actually disinformation propaganda about space. And most of us believe Star Wars and Star Trek and all that, and that's what we believe it to be. So to even suggest to anyone that you can't really travel through space in a jet-propelled rocket ship, it's not going to happen. It's not going to work.
Nope.
That's a long stretch for a lot of people to even go there. So I'm just preparing you for what is a huge shift in coming to terms with the depth of the lies and the deceptions that we've been fed for so many years and well over a century now about, you know, space movies and sci-fi movies and space and all that. It's incredible. So these guys obviously created these teleportation devices or jump rooms or stargates or whatever, and spaceships. You call it a spaceship, but it's really more like a jump room, because because the Anunnaki, from what I understand, didn't really have. Well, I guess they did have temples and things like that. So no, that would be a wrong statement to make, that they didn't have buildings. They did have buildings. That they had some temples and buildings that they would live in. But I also look, that's a whole nother debate. Like their ships, were they ships physical just because so that it contain and generate and contain the frequency that they needed, and it was within that frequency that they then moved around? Otherwise, it's difficult to do these leaps between places. And then in this density on our Earth, they would use small craft that work with our gravity, work with our air and our air pressure, with our gravity. So they use the nature of reality on Earth as we know it, the air and the atmosphere and the water. They use that to create spacecraft that can navigate, generate levitation energy fields, so they can navigate and very rapidly move around Earth without having to create complex machines or systems with which to teleport to places around the Earth, because that could, I guess, be far more complicated than just having a spacecraft that can travel really, really fast without friction and so forth, like literally travel around the world in a minute. That kind of, we know that technology exists already. We know that the industrial military complex is working with these gravity generating devices that literally, when they move, or planes or craft, whatever you want to call them, when they move, they don't experience friction, because they create an environment free of gravity and free of friction, and can move incredibly fast. So this is really important to start putting these things into context. So when you hear that kind of information, how they stack frequencies together, and again, if you as a shaman or a receiver of this information, if you're not a scientifically minded person, or you don't know the science and the physics behind it, it wouldn't make any sense. So, luckily it made sense to you because you've been exposed to this, and you and I have been hanging out, so I've shared the stuff with you. So it made a lot more sense to you. But if you hadn't had that prior knowledge, you would have gone, no, this is all garbage and rubbish. This can't be normal. This can't be real. I'm possibly hearing the wrong things. And I think that happens a lot with channelers and shamans and people like you that have the ability to connect with these other beings.
Well, that's why I try to record things, because I don't, so I recorded that they had these stacks of frequencies. So I record what they say, because whether it makes sense to me or not, let's record this so that it's preserved, so that when we have this chat, you go, oh, yeah. That's, and I think that's the cool thing. And I think that, from my understanding, the way that it works for me is that they occupy my memories. They have access to everything I've ever thought, everything I see. So sometimes when they're trying to explain a concept, they'll show me images of something like it, or they'll use some reference that I have. But in this conversation that we're talking about now with Brent, he's a motorcycle designer and car dude. And so he knows all about this fuels and chemistry and stuff. So quite often he would ask a question, and they would have to say, John Paul doesn't have anything in his vocabulary, in his memory, that can help. So just ask yes or no questions. We can give you we can answer yes or no questions, but we can't explain a concept because John Paul doesn't have that vocabulary or that understanding. And I think that's great.
Yes or no questions are actually the easiest and the best way to get to a deeper comprehension of what it is you want to understand. Because you can say, you can ask, is it a physical object? Yes or no? Well, yes, it's a little physical, but it operates within multidimensional space. Or I don't know. Was it human? No. Yes. And I know, because I've done some channelings where I had like 100 questions prepared. There were simply yes or no answers. And that always got me a lot more information in the channeling session than if you just let the being that you're talking to waffle and tell you stuff, because then they often get stuck and they go on long, tedious explanations that have very little meaning to someone like me or whoever else is receiving the information.
Yep.
Yes to no questions. I like that a lot.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and that's the thing that I love about the work that, when you and I are together, because it's easier as I get older, but I have to really focus. I have to focus on staying in this little bandwidth that they occupy. So I'm in that, it's like a radio signal, right? So it's the radio channel, and I'm in there going, okay, it's stronger now. Yep, good. And I have to hold that. So for me to have to think of a question, I have to let go of that focus, go back to conscious thought, come up with that, and then go find the channel, the frequency again. So it's much easier for me just to stay in there and other people to ask the questions. That's great. I love that.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, okay, so the Anunnaki had the technology where they would just travel in their spaceships instantly through space and time. So, that brings a big question about what Zecharia Sitchin translated about them coming to Earth and traversing space in their spaceships, and what problems they faced, and how they got to Mars and so forth. And one would need to go back and reinterpret this, because you can imagine when Sitchin was doing these translations, his interpretations were based on what he believed, or his reality, his knowledge of space. Sure. He believes in planets and space and solar systems the way we explain this, and that is most likely a very different structure. I'm not saying it's not there. I'm just saying that the way that it's structured and the energies and the physicality of it is very different from how we've been how it's been explained to us and how we imagine it, because we've never been to the moon. We've never been, well, the moon is the closest celestial body to us. The big question about what the moon is still out there. Why is it there? The mysteries of the moon are virtually infinite. And then we can't really see the other planets unless you start looking through a telescope. And then the question is, well, what is it that I'm actually looking at? What am I looking at? I'm seeing this little ball in the sphere. And then we've got these very beautiful, glossy pictures of these other planets taken by satellites that they've shot into space. And I'm starting to think, hold on, can we believe those photographs that they're showing us? They all look incredibly airbrushed to me. Airbrushed, and I don't know, it's just always something, a big question mark about, okay, which graphic artist did this one here and that version there? But that's a whole nother discussion. But it does bring up these big question marks for me. And to come back to the Anunnaki and their spaceships and how they traversed, and how we have to go back and reinterpret the translations of the Sumerian text, because what it says could be very simple, but our interpretation of it is very different.
Yeah.
And we know how we can say things in English. It can have many meanings. many meanings. One sentence can be taken up various ways.
Yep. Well, I think what I understood of the concept of a ship is that there is a container, because multiple people would come. So there would be a group that's coming to do this particular work. So there would be various Anunnaki, there would be equipment, there would be plants, there would be things, and that those had to be contained. So there is a container that everything goes together, so that when they come together in a unit in some kind of contained thing. But on this last trip that you and I did, they were explaining, when they allowed me to go up and see one, that it's a completely organic thing. That if the room needs to be this size, it just becomes that size. If a table needs to happen, a counter surface needs to happen, it just happens. That the ship is an organic living thing with consciousness. So
wow, that's really interesting that you mentioned that, because I've forgotten that part of my research many years ago into ufology and industrial military complex and Area 51 and so forth. And there was a great interview with this guy, I can't remember his name now, and he was reasonably prominent on the ufology and industrial military complex in Area 51. He was a young kid when he developed this rocket technology, and he developed this amazing technology that is like, his rockets were faster and better than anything else available that even the military had. So clearly he had a very scientific mind, and he would shoot. He was able to shoot these rockets with incredible accuracy. And the video that I recall seeing, I'm sure I probably copied it. I've got a copy of it somewhere. This is much later. He's doing this interview on YouTube. He's probably in his late 30s or mid 30s when he's doing this interview, and he recalls the event that happened to him when he was about 15 or 16, when he was making these rockets as a young kid, as a teenager. And suddenly this government SUV, black SUV, rocks up at his house on the farm. They lived somewhere out in the country, and these 2 or 3 or 4 guys in black suits get out and say, we want to talk to you about your rocket. He thought, oh God, I'm in trouble. And they said, no, we're very interested in your knowledge and your ability. And so, how accurate can you make them? And he said, well, as accurate as I want. And they say, well, and they gave him coordinates. And they said, can you land the rocket in this coordinate? And he said, sure. So he programmed his rocket and he sent it up, and bam, and they went, and there it was. The rocket landed exactly where he wanted it to land. And then they took him, and he was a young kid, and they took him one. And again, he describes how they went into this elevator, this shaft, this lift, and they went down like many, many, many floors down. And then they got out, and there was this elaborate research facility, whatever it was. And they took him to this one big, huge place where there was this weird-looking, what they described as a spaceship or a UFO. And they asked him, and they basically told him, can you figure out how this works? And then he describes how when he touched it, it wasn't metal, it wasn't wood or rock or anything. He said it was organic. It was like it was alive. And it had a wound on the side. It almost looked like a wound in an animal. From the story that he described, I almost imagined a whale, like a big whale, because even described the surface outside felt like skin of some creature, and it was dark. It was a dark gray, blackish color. And he walked through this wound because there was no other way to get in except through this wound. And then he found what would be the cockpit or the control place. And he said there was it literally was that you had to become one with this craft to be able to navigate it. And that's the video, and that's the information that he shares, and that's pretty much where it ends. But it's all consistent. And the more you hear, 20 years ago or 30 years ago, this would have been really outlandish and really out there. And now, as we realize what our capacity is, what we can do with genetic engineering and genetic manipulation today is pretty much anything. Our geneticists can program DNA to do anything, to create a skin of any kind, to create a certain shape and size, anything. So
I love that. Yeah, that's very similar to what they described to me. I remember Brant asking, could you take, he said, so for example, could you take me aboard a ship? And they said, well, we would have to completely contain you in such a way that your consciousness doesn't affect the ship. They said, because your consciousness would affect us hitting our destination.
Yes. Yeah, that makes complete sense. Okay, so let's jump to Adam's calendar for a little while. So now we're talking about spaceships that are containers. Obviously, it's a contained environment. It's made of a certain material. Whatever that material is remains unknown. It could probably be various materials. All depends who you are, what species you are, and what you've evolved and developed to serve you as a interdimensional, intergalactic spacecraft. And now they're on Earth, they're mining gold, and they create Adam's calendar at the edge of this giant gold mine that we discussed, the whole crater there below it, which is just a giant ancient gold mine with all the yellow sand, all the leftover. And on the edge of that cliff, you built Adam's calendar, which is a machine, obviously, very powerful machine that not only generates energy, but it's clearly a teleportation device. It's a beam me up Scotty device. And the reason they put it there was so that they could send the gold somewhere. And that was my conclusion. I reached that conclusion many years ago already. We're just getting more and more evidence that that's what it was, and scientific support. Argument that it was a teleportation device, a beam me up Scotty device that was not necessarily for people, but more for earthly physical objects like gold, that they would be able to put there and use the power and energy generated by Adam's calendar to put coordinates into it and teleport the gold wherever they wanted to go. Now the question is, obviously they created Adam's calendar for more than just one purpose. That was one of the purposes, but because it was on Earth and the calendar wasn't going anywhere, it was there to serve a purpose for the gold mining operation there, probably a communication device, a teleportation device, and many other things that we haven't even considered. So the reason they didn't use a spacecraft or anything is because it was a physical feature, a permanent physical feature to possibly provide energy for all the gold mining operation as well, and many other things, and then get the gold off Earth as well. Because, as you know, the big question is, where is all the gold? We've been mining gold for thousands of years, especially the last 200 years has been just a crazy explosion of gold mining around the world. Where is all the gold? We're mining more gold now than we've ever mined before, except obviously the Anunnaki mine in ancient times. Yeah. That's a whole another scale of gold mining that we can't comprehend. But in our ability to comprehend gold mining in the world today, we're mining insane amounts of gold. New gold mines are opening up every year. Not just one or two, hundreds of new gold mines open every year. You keep adding that to the gold mining production of the world. It's insane. Where is all the gold? And many people are asking that, and the answer to that is we don't know. One of the suggestions, obviously, and a reasonably good answer to that is probably not on Earth. It's going somewhere else. How it gets there is an interesting question. But so let's come back to the channelings and your sites, site guides and
right. Well, yes, we were going to talk about the genetic engineering, human manipulation stuff. Should we go back there?
Yeah. Okay. Let's go there. Yeah.
So, where were we? Right. So
Homesick Hill. We were at Homesick Hill.
Right.
Now, sorry, John Paul. Now the question is, if they could, have you got any thoughts about this? If they could come and go so easily with their spacecraft between their planet and our planet, why would they not be able to go back home to say hello to their family and hang out and then come back and do some more work on Earth? Because that seems to be a problem. Even when they describe their activities on Mars, it's like when they went to Mars, a lot of them were stuck on Mars. And I haven't figured out why that is the case yet. There's obviously a good reason that we haven't figured out yet, but they seem to have been stuck on Earth as well.
Well, they weren't stuck on Earth, because when the whole thing went down and everybody had to leave, they left. So they did all leave en masse when everybody was kicked off. But various ones of them have said that when we sign on for these expeditions, we know that we're on this expedition for the duration. That you make a commitment to this thing, and that's your commitment. And you're there for as long as it's going to be, and you may never go back because you're there. If you're sign on to the mining operation, or you sign on to the genetic lab, that's your thing. That's what you're doing. So it's not that you can't come and go if you wanted. It's that you've made a commitment, or this is your position, or this is what you have signed on to do. So it felt like they were stuck, but then most of them talk about the fact that they committed to this expedition.
Okay.
So they were here for expeditions. And, because they lived for hundreds and hundreds of years, I don't have a concept of how long an expedition would be.
Thousands of years based on the evidence that we find here.
Yep.
Okay, you know what? So, do you have anything juicy and interesting that you want to add to the genetic engineering and the experiments there at Homesick Hill and the Welcome Circle?
Sure. So there was a couple of things that I thought came out in various places that were interesting. One was that they started. So they have to accept, everyone that's watching this and listening to this, it can't be old news that the Anunnaki genetically engineered us. I mean, they need to read your books. They need to understand that this is the deal. So we're starting from that as a baseline, that they needed these workers. They created this worker. Here we go. So they created this that was part their DNA and part the DNA of the evolving Neanderthal-ish species. So that created this hybrid, which gives us this jump. And they said that it was a hermaphroditic creature. So they were cloning, and it's a hermaphroditic creature. They were mostly male in the way that they were constructed. Their genitalia was just waste elimination. It wasn't for sexual reproduction at all. And that the problem with that was that they didn't last very long, that they would incubate them until the point that they were adult size, they would release them, but they only lasted, so they said, in your lifespan, about 20 years. That was all we got out of them.
John Paul, hold on. Is this one of the channelings and the downloads, the information you got from one of the Sight Whisperers and Guardians? Oh my God, this is actually unbelievable, because this is exactly the channeling I got. When I spoke earlier about having 100 questions, yes or no answers.
Oh yeah,
that's the one channel that I did, and this must have been 2008, very early days of Adam's Calendar exploration search. I went to a very famous channeler in Johannesburg. She got big clients, and it's really interesting. Some of her clients are like CEOs of big companies, like stock exchange companies, that come to her for channeling. Never publicly state that, but she's got some serious heavy duty clients that come to her for advice and channelings. So I went to her and I did this whole thing with the yes or no questions for about an hour and a half.
Oh,
out of that came the whole thing of cloning. Were they male or female? And no, exactly, they were asexual. They were mostly masculine, strong, but they couldn't reproduce, and like you said, and they wouldn't last long. They lasted maybe 20 years, or if that 20 or 30 years, and they would be cloned and born into adulthood. So they didn't start as children. I mean, Anunnaki weren't going to look after children, so they cloned them to be born as adults. So I'm going to throw it back at you to add to this. This is just fantastic. So two complete separate channelings that corroborate exactly the same, and they were cloned in these cloning chambers. A long time ago, I just believed immediately that these were cloning chambers, and that was confirmed to me in that channeling, that yes, those hexagonal structures that I've often shown were the cloning chambers. So I'm throwing it back to you to hear what you got.
Yes, I mean, on the bucket list of places that we need to go stand in, it's one of those. I haven't been to one of those places with you. So then they said, and the creature, they always called it the creature would get disease. It would it wasn't a very strong or sustainable creature. So they said, and it would have all kinds of mutations and distortions as you started cloning along. Any mutation would just go rampant, and then you have to back up. And so it was just difficult. So they said it was so much easier once they created the female. And they said, look, let's just let it reproduce on its own. Let's see how it goes. So there's that other circle that's off just as you walk. In the normal way we walk in, you pass kind of a circle that's been repurposed many times. But that was the original place where the female creature was created. And they said that the beauty of that was that once you worked with the female and the whole menstruation cycle, then you have a creature that cleanses itself and it renews itself, and it's so much easier to modify because the female is stronger, and it locks in those genetic traits and it keeps them. So then the creature, but they said that was the only difficulty with that, was that they would have to let the creature propagate and then leave them for long periods of time and see if it was going to sustain and be all right. And then they would come back and, yeah, look, it's doing pretty well. So I thought that was a fascinating thing when they talked about that one.
And obviously, the moment the creatures start procreating, so that we have a story of Adam and Eve, the fact that Eve was, made from Adam's rib, and so that fits the story. That yes, they needed to create a creature that was genetically compatible to this creature called Adamu, and so of course they used the DNA and made a creature, changed some of the chromosomes, and created a female. And I can imagine how complicated that must have been to genetically.
Yeah, so they said getting the timing of the cycles and rhythms of the creature correct to the cycles of the earth was difficult, and the menstruation process was key to this, so that the female could cleanse and renew herself.
Wow.
So like, whoa.
And then obviously with the problem that comes with that, so now you've got these unconscious beings copulating and procreating and making babies, and then the relationship to the baby. How does a baby get born? And knowing and learning how to give birth. So that's an education process. So I mean, we don't think about it. This is a whole new chapter in how humanity was not only created but nurtured into knowing what to do, how to give birth, how to bring up the child, how to take care of the child, because babies are very, very vulnerable and not like animals. We're a species that couldn't survive without nurturing and being fed. If you think about the animal kingdom, very different.
Yeah.
And the human kingdom, because we somehow don't, because we were created and inserted into this on a very different level, different reason.
So then the other thing that I think was fascinating is lots of the times when we had people with us, they would ask DNA genetic modification questions. And if we have so much of the Anunnaki DNA, how do we activate that? How do we activate the other parts of our DNA? That seemed to be a theme that ran through a lot of different questions. So a couple of things that they said was that they removed the connection. It's like they turned off the DNA, but they just removed the connecting parts to the DNA so that the creature was bound to the earth. And they said it was critical that the creature be bound to this planet, to be bound to the earth. And they said they are not bound to any planet. They travel freely. They could live here. They could move. So lots of extraterrestrials don't have a binding thing to a planet. But what they did when they created the creature that turned into us is bound the creature to the earth. So one of the questions, it was Emma Jane that asked these questions about telepathy. And they said, well, the problem with telepathy is that there's a very strong magnetic frequency over the whole surface of this planet. And that interferes with telepathy. So if you wanted to activate the telepathic abilities, you could, but you would have to be comfortable to be far less grounded than you are. So then that morphed into a question about, well, what about plant medicines? And, what about all the plant teachers that can take us and show us other dimensions and things? And they said that, yes, the plant is carrying you to the place of pure consciousness. So the plant actually wraps you and contains you to get you to the place where telepathy and all those things can happen. But it's the plant that surrounds you and contains you, carrying you to a place of pure consciousness. Then they said to us, you need to be able to practice to do this on your own and feel safe. You feel safe when you're grounded and centered because of your connection to the earth. That feels good and whole to you. But we don't use planets that way.
It's amazing. When you start going into this information, you realize how connected and interconnected everything is, and how completely focused we are in this space-time, in this density of ours, and how in many ways how trapped we are here. And I think that entrapment goes to what we mentioned earlier, is what space is and how we actually travel through space. So there's definitely a strong support for what I mentioned earlier, the fact that we're trapped on Earth.
Yep.
We don't even know what space is. We can't travel through space. We think we do, but those are most likely not accurate reports that we get. They might be going to other planets, but we're certainly not seeing how they go there and what they do there. And they sell us a fairy tale that's shot in a Hollywood studio somewhere.
Yeah.
You know? Space might be the final frontier, but it's shot in a Hollywood basement. Red Hot Chili Peppers.
Oh, yeah.
Sometimes you go to music and lines in songs that just like a wow.
Yep. So that's a fun digression. We can have a couple of digressions. Do you remember when they, I don't remember where we were, and it was probably Imogen again, but someone asked about music. Oh, they asked the Anunnaki, yes. Do you have music? I love that one.
Yes, that is one of my favorite ones. And in fact, I just wrote about it yesterday. I think I posted a tweet about our capacity to compose and create music. That is a divine gift, way beyond the Anunnaki. We're dealing with something here that so please go. That's a fantastic story.
So the tagline of that story is music saved our ass more than once. Yes. And that one of the as you start to piece together the story, if there's a narrative arc of the Anunnaki coming, getting gold, doing these things, moving along, creating humans, blah, blah, blah. There's an end to that story when everyone's kicked off. And it's like, okay, you fucked around too much. You created this creature. You're not supposed to do that. And what do we do? And so there was a big debate. And there were galactic council or whoever it is, people saying, nope, kill them all off. You have to get back to let the earth evolve on its own. You have to take this interference of this creature off. You have to get rid of it. And other people saying, no, this is incredible. These are amazing. Let's see what happens. Let's see how they evolve. Nothing's ever happened like this before with this kind of hybrid thing. Let's let it go. So there was a big debate. And one of the reasons that it was decided to leave us alone, and that's the moratorium, where no one was able to come and muck with us genetically anymore, and everyone had the hands off. Let's see what this creature does on its own, was because of music. And they said that your ability to make music, the way you do that, to knit hearts together, was the phrase. They said that's incredibly rare. And so we were asking, well, say more about what do you mean? And they started flashing all these images of concerts. And you've got hundreds and thousands of people, all of one heart. And that the power of the music that we create can knit hearts into that incredible unified force that has thousands of people in the same heart. And they said that's
heart
just
space.
Yeah, they said that's amazing.
Yeah, that is just absolutely. And being a musician for many years, I didn't realize that having a musical ability is a very unique gift. Not everybody is musical. And I always thought that everybody can do this. Everybody can play piano or play guitar, or, well, not play guitar, but everybody can sing songs or write songs or hear music in their head. I hear music in my head. And then I realized many years ago, no, very few people can do that. And those who can are creators. I mean, creators of a very unique kind, because sound being the source code for everything. So when you create music, you imagine it. The moment you've imagined it, you've created it already. And then you just write it down. It's like an artist, a painter. They imagine, or they look at a scene, or they imagine a scene, and they paint it. The picture is in their mind. The same with music. And I don't know if I spoke about it before, but I can hear a piece of music, and I can hear it. I can hear the melody from beginning to end in a flash, in an instant. And I can think, okay, I hear a classical version of it, and I can hear a whole orchestra with all the classical instruments, from the violins and cellos and the oboes and clarinets and flutes and piccolos and trumpets and bassoons and French horns, and I can hear the orchestration. It's you can't teach this to somebody. This is my gift. You can't teach that. That's what I was born with. And the capacity to be able to take that and then write it down on a piece of paper, so a group of people can sit around with their instruments and put that creation to life is just, think about what we've just done here. We've taken an inanimate, ideological bullshit story. Because if you told somebody, oh, I hear a piece of music, they say, oh, really? Prove it. It's like, like, well, prove it. Down for you. Oh, okay, shit. Now that you've written down, you've actually proved it. So, in fact, and I've never really gone here before, and I love this moment, I've never realized that proving that you can hear music and being able to write it down in its very simplistic form or very complex form on sheets for an whole orchestra or a band, because there's a big difference between writing for a rock band or writing for a music score for a movie or for a classical orchestra. The fact that you can take that idea or imagine something and make it a physical thing that becomes audible reality is creation of the highest form. And that is, I think, what this whole thing that you mentioned about is the fact that we can do that. And now, if I remember correctly, the Anunnaki don't have complex music. They don't have music. Or they have some very basic forms of music.
They said we have audible frequency that we use to manipulate emotion. But they said we don't have anything like melody or melody combined with words that so knit hearts together. They said we don't have anything. They think that's amazing. But they said, that's you guys. You've done this all on your own. You didn't get that from us. You didn't get that from the Neanderthals. You have evolved to be able to do that. That, as you say, you take this inspiration, you somehow write it down, you communicate it, and then it gets created in sound. And incredible. That particular sewing together of different tonal frequencies knits hearts together and mobilizes people and does amazing things. That, I mean, think what music has done in terms of leading people, uniting people.
Okay, and what you just touched upon a really important aspect of how music has been used and abused for propaganda and lie purposes. Because look what they do with movies, right? You can make a movie, you can sell a lie, you can tell a story with images. So when somebody sees something, they're seeing something that was pre-cooked for them. That's it, right? That's what they see. Everybody sees the same thing, pretty much. But when you hear a melody, well, let me come back to so what they then do is they take musicians and they create the mood and the music to make it laughable or depressing or moving or tear-jerking, stressful. So the music creates the moods in a movie. So you use the capacity, the human capacity to compose and create music for certain conditions that creates the ambiance in a movie. Because without music, movies would be very, very boring, incredibly boring.
Yep.
And we've got the incredible number of musicians and composers that have become so incredibly good at creating the ambiance through music for movies. I mean, think about it. You know, for me, one of the most impressive explanations how powerful music is. In fact, I used to work for my friend many years ago as a sound editor. Now, you know, when I lived in LA in 1985, when I was a young musician, we were waiting for our big deal to come from one of the big labels. I got a job at Canon Films, and there I was editing. I was the sound effects editor and audio effects, and I would do the final mix for the trailers, all the trailers for Canon Films. And I think I did about like 60 or 70 trailers in the time that I was there, which is a lot of work. And where was I going with this? Completely
manipulating emotions.
Manipulating emotions, and oh no, man, I completely lost my thought. It's terrible. The music. It'll come back to me.
Yep. No, but it is the image does no work. You know, when silent films, right? Silent films didn't work. People didn't go there and just watch. You had a pianist that carried the emotion through the story. Because the image alone doesn't do it for us.
I remember I was going with it. So I taught sound effects and sound design, and I would take the students, they all come to the film school to learn how to make movies and how to make film. And they forget about how important the sound is. A lot of them want to make beautiful images and these long, beautiful shots and this and that and special effects, but they forget how important the sound and the music is. So what I would do, I would introduce them to the movie world, say welcome, and say how many of you realize how important sound is, and they just wouldn't. Most of them wouldn't know the importance of sound. So what I would do, in fact, I wouldn't even ask them. What I would do, I would take them into this big auditorium, and I would say, we're going to just watch the first 3 minutes of a movie, and just to introduce you to the sound design lecture, and I would switch the lights off. I would start playing the movie, but without the visuals, just the soundtrack of the movie. And then 3 minutes in, I would switch the lights on and say, well, what movie did we just see? And they would all know what movie we saw from the sound, right? It's just like everybody knew the movie just from the sound. You didn't have to see the visuals, the sound. And then I asked them, well, what was happening? And they would tell me what was happening. So the sound brings back the visual memory of it. But when you look at the visual memory, when you look at the visuals alone without the sound, you won't be able to recall the sound effects that support the visual. It's really interesting how powerful sound is in the medium of movies. And this is why television and movies and radio, obviously, are such important and powerful propaganda tools to sell lies and disinformation and propaganda, either positive, but mostly is being used for negative purposes, as we know. And just to finish on this is how powerful sound can be is in creating emotion and effect, right? In a movie, I think the most important or the most memorable and mind-blowing soundtrack to any movie, just two notes that most people alive today hear those two notes and they know exactly the movie, the situation, the fear, the danger, and that is the two notes from Jaws. Da-dum.
Yep.
Da-dum. You play those two notes to anyone, da-dum, and they know danger.
Yep. Yep, absolutely. The composer that I work with for most of my stuff, David Nielsen, he did lots of theater work for me, and I ran a theater in Canada that did mysteries. And I remember we did a particularly scary one. And I remember I was standing with David, and they came out and they said, oh my God, I was on the edge of my seat. That was just, oh my God. And I said, yes, well, it's all thanks to David and the sound score. And they said, what sound score? And David said that was the best compliment he's ever had in his life.
Yes. Yeah, it is. Because, we go to movies and we get so absorbed in the visuals, we forget that it's being driven and lifted by the sound, sound and the. Just think about, what's that? Blair Witch Project. I think Blair Witch Project is one of the best examples of how you can make a shitty movie on a shitty camera on a cell phone, but if the sound is good and the sound creates the mood, the ambience, the environment, the anxiety, the tension, that's it. You can shoot a movie on your cell phone. You can probably make a Hollywood blockbuster on a cell phone. Well, I guess Blair Witch Project. It was, exactly, yeah.
Yep. If you got the good sound. Right.
I think
we're pretty close to the end. Yep. So I think that the thing that I think is important is to understand what they were sharing about what they did and how we've gone beyond that. And I think that one of the hopeful things about the work and the tours and the questions that people ask is, well, okay, so what can we do now? And the Anunnaki that are talking to me are very impressed with and surprised with what we're doing. So I remember when we inaugurated the healing circle on the lawn by the river, and they said, we suggested this as a possibility, but now that you've done this, and then we did those huge healing ceremonies in Blobash Corral, and they said, Blobash Corral was not intended as a healing circle. That is nothing that we ever intended. But the fact that you have taken this energy and the potential of this energy and the fact that it works above and that it works below, and you've harnessed this energy for a healing purpose, that's amazing. And I just loved hearing that we've taken their stuff and we've gone, well, if it does that, and, we have followed it, we've reshaped it, we've opened ourselves to new understandings, new discoveries. And they said, I remember there was a woman, Anunnaki, that was watching us as we inaugurated that circle. And she said, I would like to write this in the Anunnaki history, that this advance has now happened with our technology.
So what you're saying is that somewhere in the distant space and different dimensions and planets and other species, the Anunnaki has this chapter in their history, how they planted the seeds and created a creature that created this amazing stuff. They created music. They have the capacity to do all this stuff that they normally wouldn't do. And I think that ties back into what you said a few sessions ago about being closer to nature and less technology and less invention or whatever, and being close to nature is what we to be recognizing and relearning, is that we can get pretty much everything we can from being one with nature, one with the frequencies that surround us on every level, from health to mental health, technology. Look how science is moving into biomimicry, mimicking biological organisms and forms to create advanced technology. I mean, that's a whole nother thing we can talk about. Claire Janie should be the one to bring in this, because she's an expert on that. I know a little bit, but I think I just want to just bring in one last thing in here about the music thing, about how we've created music. There's a beautiful movie, very unknown movie called History of Future Folk. The History of Future Folk. And it's about this alien guy arriving on Earth, preparing from a planet called Hondo. It's a lovely little movie. Find it, watch it. It is fantastic. It's one of those wonderful movies, unexpected, out of the blue. I saw it in one of the flights going to the States at one stage. And I watched this. I've never heard of this. I watched it on a flight. Awesome movie. So they send this major commander, military commander from planet Hondo to Earth to come and find Earth, prepare it for invasion and then destruction, killing all humanity so they can take over the planet for themselves. And he comes to Earth and he's ready to do it. He sneaks and works in the nuclear missile things, and he's going to kill everybody. And then he discovers music. He realizes that Earthlings can create and play music. And then he goes, I can't destroy this planet. I can't destroy it. And he goes into hiding, gets a different name. He gets a job and he lives as an alien for like several decades. And then they send another alien after him. They're human. They look human. Yeah, they're human. To come and find him and kill him, and basically so they can replace him with somebody else. And this other guy arrives, and then he plays him music, and this guy goes, "Oh my God, we can't!" And then they create this music duo that they do these gigs, and they basically sing the songs. And in their songs, they sing lyrics. We came from a planet of Hondo to come and take over the world, and people going, "Yay, yeah!" They love the songs. And they're just telling them the truth. What really went? What a lovely little movie, man.
Gorgeous. Well, yeah. I mean, music saved our bacon, saved the whole planet from being cleansed in one of these times when the big debate was the Anunnaki have done this bad thing, and they've invited all these other races to come and muck around with this creature and make their own version. And this is just bad. This was never supposed to happen. Shame on you, shame on you. And here we are. So I think that, I think it's important for us to understand that, yes, that was how it was created. But, we don't know, 400,000 years ago, 500,000 years ago, some far distant past. But, and here we are today. So let's go forward. We can't go back.
Let's go forward and create beautiful, harmonious music of unity that leads us to abundance and prosperity.
Yeah. Absolutely.
All right. Well, John Paul,
All
thank
right.
you very much. Thanks.
Maybe next time we really will do the
chat.
giants. Maybe next time we really
Oh,
could do the giants.
yeah, we'll get to the giants by some channel. Giants are awesome, and they've taught us a lot. I know that. Well, thanks to you, they've taught us a lot.
Yeah.
And we got a lot of information from the giants. And what went down here, it's like mind blowing. Again, so different from anything anybody could have imagined. And yet, we find the fossil evidence everywhere. So when we talk about it, it's not just, we think this is what it is. The reason we have that knowledge and information, thanks to you, is because of the fossils, the body parts of the giants that we have found and located and collected. The small ones are in the museum. The large ones are still out in the fields and the mountains because they're too big to move. But we'll get to that in the future episode.
All right. Ciao.
Bye for now. So John Paul and I are up on the mountain, just not far away from the crocodile, the fossilized crocodile in a giant rock just behind him. And on the way back to the car, guess what we found? Beautiful. Ah, spectacular. Thank you.